All right, let's jump right in. Back in late December 2020, buried deep inside a massive stimulus package, there was a tiny little change made to the tax code. And you'd be forgiven for totally missing it, most people did. But according to our source for this explainer, this was no minor tweak. It was actually the first major update to this specific rule in over 30 years, and it could have huge implications for how your money can grow, tax-free, and maybe a lot faster than you thought possible.
So what was this mystery change? We're talking about Internal Revenue Code Section 7702. Now, I know what you're thinking. Section 7702? Sounds incredibly dry, right? But stick with me, because this section is basically the rule book that governs how life insurance policies get their amazing tax perks. And understanding this one change is the key to unlocking a whole new financial strategy.
And the financial vehicle that's the star of this show is something called an Indexed Universal Life Insurance Policy, or IUL for short. Our source claims that these new rules have basically supercharged these policies, making right now potentially the best time since 1988 to take a look at them.
So what in the world is an IUL? Well, think of it as a life insurance policy with a really cool engine. The cash you put into it doesn't just sit there earning a fixed rate. Instead, its growth is tied to a market index, something like the S&P 500. So you get to participate in the market's gains, but, and this is the best part, you're protected from losses if the market tanks.
Now here's where the strategy gets really interesting. For the folks our source is talking about, the goal isn't really the death benefit. It's kind of flipping the whole idea of life insurance on its head. The goal is to use the policy as a tax-free investment bucket. You want to stuff in the absolute maximum amount of cash the IRS will let you, get it in there as fast as possible, all while buying the bare minimum amount of life insurance you need to keep the whole thing legit and tax-free.
Okay, so to really get why this 2020 change is such a big deal, we gotta hop in the time machine and go all the way back to the 1980s. That's when the original rules of the game were written, and they set the stage for everything that came after.
It all started with two laws, TFRA in '82 and DFRA in '84, and their whole purpose was to draw a line in the sand. They basically defined how much actual life insurance you had to have compared to your cash investment for the IRS to say, okay, yep, that's a life insurance policy, you get the tax-free benefits.
And the big idea behind these laws, according to our source, was a single concept, parity. It's a fancy word, but it just means equality or fairness. The goal was to make sure the system worked fairly, no matter how old you were when you started.
So, how did this whole parity thing actually play out? Well, it's pretty clever. Let's say you're a 20-year-old. To put in a chunk of money, the rules might say you need a massive, say, $5 million death benefit. But hey, you're 20. That insurance is dirt cheap. Now take a 60-year-old putting in the same amount. They might only need a $1.25 million death benefit. Their insurance is way more expensive per dollar, but they need so much less of it. The magic is, the actual annual cost ends up being pretty much the same for both of them. See? A level playing field.
Well, this system worked maybe a little too well. So much money started flowing into these policies that the big traditional banks got nervous. And that's when Congress decided to put up a big, fat speed bump to slow things down.
On June 21, 1988, a new law dropped. It was called the Technical and Miscellaneous Revenue Act, or TAMRA. And our source is pretty clear on why it happened. Banks were seeing what they called a massive exodus of money, leaving their vaults and heading into these insurance products. So they went to Congress and said, you got to slow this train down. And this law did exactly that.
Basically, TAMRA slammed the brakes on just dumping a huge pile of cash into your policy all at once. To keep all those tax-free benefits, you suddenly had to stretch your payments out over a minimum period. Our source describes it as needing at least 5 payments over about 5 years. It was a speed bump, plain and simple, and it delayed how fast your money could really get to work.
And that was the law of the land? Forget this, 32 years. That speed bump was just part of the deal. Until the very end of 2020, when almost silently, the game changed completely. December 27, 2020, that's the date. The old assumptions, the interest rate math that had been baked into these policies for over 3 decades, finally got an overhaul. The calculations were brought into the modern low-interest rate world.
So, what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, let's use the example from our source of a 65-year-old man. Under the old rules, he could maybe put in about 82 grand a year. But with the new rules, bam, that jumps to over 107 grand a year. We're talking about getting way more money in the door, period.
But honestly, the real headline here is the speed. That old 5-year-plus timeline, you can pretty much forget about it. Now you can often get the policy fully funded in just 3 or 4 years. And that is a huge deal because it means your money isn't sitting on the sidelines. It's in the game, working for you that much faster.
And if that wasn't enough, it's not just about speed and volume. The new rules actually made the policies themselves more efficient. Because they rejiggered the math on how much insurance you have to buy, our source says the internal costs, the drag on your returns, can drop by a massive 20 to 50%.
Okay, so let's put a bow on all this. We've gone through the history, the speed bumps, the big supercharge in 2020, but what's the bottom line? What does our source say this all means for you?
Well, it really boils down to this. You can get more money into your policy. You can do it way, way faster. And the whole thing can run cheaper because the insurance costs are potentially a lot lower. You're getting less of the insurance you don't really want and more of the tax-free growth that you do. It's like they put a supercharger on the engine.
I mean, you gotta love how our source puts it. They say, this thing makes universal life zing like never before. It's not just some small adjustment, it's a fundamental power-up for the whole strategy.
So that leaves us with the big question, right? Was this just some obscure, boring tweak in the tax code that only accountants care about, or was it a quiet but powerful retirement game changer? Based on everything we've looked at here, it seems like something you might not want to ignore.